I'm going to move on to lesson 8 today. So to start off, we have 2 vocabulary words today, native and immigrant. So these are kind of like antonyms because a native person is someone who belongs to a place because they're born there or born into a group of people. Whereas immigrants are people who travel from one region to another, and that's not where they're born. We've been learning that good readers identify important information about the setting prior to reading and use additional sources to build background knowledge. So we've looked at the video, we've looked at the cover, we've looked at the blurb, and we've started looking at some of the pre-reading, like the acknowledgments and the introduction. We're going to look further at the introduction today. Today, I'm going to teach you that good readers gather important information about the people who were influenced by the central historical event of a historical nonfiction text. Okay, so we're just going to be gathering information about that time and about that location and about the people who lived there. And we know that this is all real, true information because it's historical nonfiction. So nonfiction, real information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and reread. I know we read the first 2 paragraphs of the introduction. And I'm going to reread the first 2, and then I'm going to go on to the third. As I'm doing that, okay, we want to be looking at the groups of people affected by the gold rush, and we're going to be looking at things that we learned about them, because that's going to help us better understand the story once we get there. So I'll read those first 3 paragraphs. As I'm reading that, I want you to be thinking about the groups of people, the immigrants, the children, and the native Indians, and think, if we were at school, what things would we add to our chart right here? What information would we put in here? Okay? So any details that we hear about them. So I'm going to reread those first 2 paragraphs, and then we'll read the third. So introduction. Leaves on the nearby trees were turning yellow, and a chilly wind blew through the gold camp. 10-year-old Donald McDonald watched the miners shovel the pay dirt into the wooden solace boxes. When the miners stopped the water flowing through the boxes, Donald's father motioned him over, dipping both hands in the freezing liquid. Donald felt around in the gravel and sand at the bottom. Suddenly, up came his fingers, clutching shiny nuggets. "Gold!" he screamed. "Look, Mama, I'm rich." The miners and the prospectors laughed. They wanted to get rich too, and some of them did. 100 years ago, scenes like these were repeated throughout the Yukon and Alaska territories, wherever gold was being mined. In America and around the world, people had lost their jobs and were suffering through a great economic depression. So when news arrived about gold's discoveries in the North Country, thousands of men and women traveled there to seek the fortune. As a result, many children grew up in these gold rush settlements. So a settlement is kind of like a camp. It's not a permanent place. It's kind of thrown together. It can turn into a permanent place, but it's kind of just thrown together. And this is the third paragraph where we left off yesterday. Some children came north with their mothers to join long-absent fathers. Others were born into the boom towns. Many were members of Native Alaskan or Yukon First Nations bands who had lived in the north for thousands of years. The lives of these native people changed forever when gold rushes settled where only family fish camps had existed before. Some children had native mothers and white fathers, arrangements that were common and practical early in settlement of the north. As these children grew up, they had to choose between the new world of mining and towns and the traditional native lifestyle of fishing, trapping, and hunting. Sorry about my neighbors, if you could hear that. All right, so we just talked about the 3 different groups of people. Immigrants, right? Those are people who had traveled west, and they were either joining in fish camps, creating settlements, but they were all often looking for gold. And so there's thousands of people who came to the Yukon Territory from all over the world. So those are the immigrants. The children, some children were traveling with their parents. Some children traveled with their mother and met their father there, because a lot of times the men went first. And other children were born in the gold rush towns. So maybe their parents had immigrated to the gold rush town and were born there. And then there's 2 more groups. Native Indians who were born there, that are children. They didn't immigrate at all. And then there's also kind of a mix. So there might be some white moving to West and having a child with a native Indian. So then it kind of made them have to choose between the towns and the native ways. And the native Indians, they lived in Alaska and Yukon territories for thousands of years before the gold rush. So you can imagine this was their territory, this was their land. And then all of a sudden, thousands of people came moving west in search of gold. And to survive, they would fish, trap, and hunt. Okay, they didn't keep animals like the settlers were starting to do. So that was all important because we know that we're going to read about all those different groups once we get into the chapters here. Okay, so today and every day you read, I want you to gather important information about groups of people in your book. Okay, so not just historical nonfiction, any. You want to be thinking about the characters and you want to be thinking about the groups of people and documenting the things that you know about them to help you better understand. Okay, additionally, on this video on Google Classroom, I did put a Brain Pop video on here for westward expansion. If you have a hard time logging into that, comment and I can help you, but it should be open because right now Brain Pop is available. Also, I do want you guys logging on to Freckle. Okay, I see that some students are logging on, and I also want to see that we're reading. So if you're writing in your reader's notebook, that's great. I can tell you're reading that way. If not, make sure that you get that done so I can see, and that way I can respond. Stay busy. Bye, guys.